It is my pleasure to welcome General David Petraeus to the Cipher Brief studio. General Petraeus, I know you've been paying close attention to what's been happening in the Middle East, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on President Trump's decision to basically delay a decision by up to 2 weeks, he has said at this point. What advantage does that give him?
I think that's a sound decision. All the military pieces are not in place. It's publicly known that the second aircraft carrier that is coming from the Pacific still has to transit a few more days. Then getting everything in place around it, the existing carrier task force, where to position them, probably moving additional defenses into the theater, closing out the movement of the additional fighter bombers and other assets that are needed for the possibility of that strike on Fordow in particular. But it's more than that as well. It's also, I think, an opportunity to not just set the military conditions, but also to set the political conditions in Washington and perhaps around the world. It seems as if there is going to be some vote in the Senate, uh, that one of the senators has a bill that will force a vote. And I think this could actually be healthy. You can argue that the legal justification of this is somewhat in question. You obviously can't conduct this under the authorities of the authority to use military force, the AUMF, that was passed into law in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. That addresses Al Qaeda, relatives of Al Qaeda. We've actually gotten to grandchildren of Al Qaeda at this point in time, essentially Sunni extremists, and those who protected Al Qaeda. That was the target of that, and that made them declared hostiles. Well, obviously, Iran does not fit that. So now you're asking about the self defense authority of the United States and the authority that the president has by Article 1 to ensure the defense of our citizens and assets and capabilities around the world. Again, that's a little bit of a stretch. In fact, the fact that we can delay this by 2 weeks seems to indicate that relative to the United States, it's not the most urgent of threats, the way you could argue that some other cases certainly have been. So again, I think it would be healthy, actually, especially given the highly publicized split with one wing of the president's own party. I suspect there would be bipartisan support for a strike that is conducted against Fordo, with no boots on the ground, no follow-on operations, maybe some ancillary related operations just to ensure that there's a capacity and a legal authority to conduct those. But this is very different, for example, than the authorization for the invasion of Iraq and the toppling of that regime. This is about destroying a known threat, and which is, of course, the advanced enrichment facility that's buried deeply underground inside the mountain at Fordow, and the stockpile of highly enriched uranium that's in there. This is 60% enriched uranium. There's no reason whatsoever for Iran to have enriched to this level. In fact, the IAEA, in condemning Iran just a few days before Israel began its campaign, identified that there's no plausible explanation whatsoever for having enriched to this level, unless, of course, you eventually want to have a nuclear bomb. And by the way, in that count, it's been interesting to see different elements talking past each other, even criticizing each other at times over statements they've made. The DNI, I think, faithfully conveyed the position of the international community, which is that the decision to make a nuclear weapon has not been made. But the president, others are also correct in saying, yes, but the amount of time required to enrich to weapons grade from the 60% is relatively short. It could be a few weeks. And then, of course, however much time it takes for the, at that time, scientists that were in existence to shape that into a nuclear device. And of course, then there's the issue of how you would deliver it. But the point is that Iran has done everything necessary to position itself to be a nuclear weapons power. It just hasn't made the very final decision, again, to enrich to weapons grade. But the fact that they have 60% and enough of that for 9 bombs, according to the IAEA, is extraordinarily worrisome. And I can fully understand why Israel has carried out the actions that they have, especially in the wake of October 7. We should talk a bit about how that's changed their strategic outlook. But of course, the 60 days that President Trump had given them had expired. The IAEA report condemned Iran. In the wake of October 7, Israel has really changed its approach to its neighbors and to the region. It is not going to allow threats to materialize. It is not going to wait on diplomacy where Iran endlessly temporizes and runs out the clock and so forth. And I think from their perspective, that is understandable. And of course, they're in a much better position to do this with Iran's proxies dramatically degraded. Hezbollah and Hamas obviously can't do anything much to help Iran in its hour of need. And then the fact that the murderous Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria, which was an ally to the Iranians and allowed the transit of weapons and ammunition and munitions and so forth across its territory to supply Hezbollah, that is gone. That regime was toppled. So the overall situation in the region is very different, with one exception, and that was, of course, Iran's nuclear program and all of the 60% uranium that it had enriched, noting finally that going from 60% to weapons grade is a lot easier from going from the lower enrichment levels to 60%.
Let me ask you, we're seeing some indications from Israelis now that this might be an ongoing conflict. It might not be a one and done type operation. We've seen that from the beginning, and they made that clear. But with the U.S. now moving military assets into place, what is based on your incredible experience commanding teams, what is your sense that this would be a limited engagement on behalf of the U.S.? How could this spiral into something much bigger than we're anticipating right now?
Well, I think one reason to move the second aircraft carrier task force and other assets into various bases around the Gulf region is to ensure that some of the responses by Iran will not be effective or would have very limited effectiveness. They could, for example, try to mine the Strait of Hormuz or otherwise impede maritime freedom of navigation from the Gulf. And that's important because, of course, still 20% of the world's crude oil comes out of the Gulf on a daily basis. So that is very, very important to the global economy. If you position, I don't want to presume this, but presumably one carrier inside the Gulf and task force and the other outside, you've got enormous assets to try to prevent that kind of action in the first place. And if it does take place, to very quickly clear that strait. It also provides additional assets to prevent Iran from attacking our bases in the region. Some of those undoubtedly will be under attack, as some have already been in the greater Iraq and Syria region. We have extra assets, presumably, to retaliate for that if that comes necessary, perhaps even to defend against it. And then there could be actions against the infrastructure of energy in the various Gulf states that could also have an effect on the global economy, just as did that strike on the Saudi Abqaiq oil processing facility, oil production facility, that in which 50% of the capacity of that facility was taken out. That was about 5% of the world's crude oil production and export at the time. And I think, again, this will all enable better defense against that kind of activity, in some cases preventing it from taking place, in other cases allowing the U.S. to remedy whatever it is that has happened, if necessary, to retaliate. So again, I think that, again, the focus is on doing what Israel cannot do itself, at least from the air. There are obviously other possibilities, and that is use our massive ordnance penetrator, the 30,000-pound, huge, very precise munition, and the aircraft that can carry it, the B-2 bomber. Of course, we already had 4 of those deployed to the region. I'm sorry, 6. We already had 6 of those deployed in the region at Diego Garcia, along with 4 B-52s and 4 F-15s, all publicly out there. So again, I think this is just putting more military pieces in place to try to achieve success in the primary mission, and then to prevent Iran from being successful with various means of retaliation that it could employ. It is a much bigger war for Israel, but that does not include us, and as they are painstakingly taking down the nuclear infrastructure of Iran, also the military and security infrastructure, even the Ministry of Interior, their propaganda hub, their state-owned news networks, and so forth, as was publicly seen broadcasting while that was actually hit, and a variety of other tasks. The big question there is, could they try to foster regime change? Well, certainly Prime Minister Netanyahu has encouraged the Iranian people, but this is something I think that is very, very challenging. It also is a cautionary tale to remember what has happened in some of the regime changes that we have brought about, some of those that just happened on their own, say the situation in Yemen, or some of the others in the region, sometimes turn out well, at least temporarily. Tentatively, the direction in Syria is encouraging. You have to be very, very careful, especially given the origin of the leader who has overseen that operation, but he's saying the right things. But again, it's a very difficult activity to predict when it comes to the outcome. And you're never sure that it might not just be another guy with the most soldiers and the most guns, and perhaps equally authoritarian and theocratic in the orientation. Having said that, I think I'd be willing to take the chance on that, even as I realize, of course, that there are many ethnic and sectarian and even national fault lines that run through Iran, including Kurds, and there's Sunni Arabs, or obviously the majority is Shia Persian, but there are many other elements in that. The Baluchis, when you get out to the east, um, have plans, I'm sure, if they could ever gain autonomy. So again, really complicated situation here, but that's up to the Israelis, and I think it's fair for them to be doing what they're doing, given that Iran has repeatedly had as its rallying cry "Death to Israel," and the current supreme leader even said that Israel would be gone by 2040. They've also, of course, said "Death to America" on a number of occasions as well.
Yeah. Iran has really been hit hard by this. We've seen the targeted assassinations or murders or whatever you call them of its military commanders, of its nuclear commanders, leaders. We've seen really over the last, well, since the Hamas terrorist attack in 2023, we've seen the degradation of Hamas's ability to do anything in the region. We've seen their actions against Lebanese Hezbollah be severely degraded. So we've seen also over the last few days with this Israeli strike, a lot of their missile launchers being targeted and taken out, which is rather significant. So I'm wondering, what might Iran still be able to do? How could Iran still strike back at this point? What's your assessment?
Well, they still do have missiles and apparently missile launchers to deploy them, although they're losing some of those almost every time that they do use them. And there's a real question about the missile math here. How many missiles do they have left in launchers, and how many interceptors does Israel have? Iran also has been deploying drones, not with particular success, but they clearly have some of those that are left. They have some shorter range systems that could again be used against our bases or against countries in the region, some of whose airspace must be open for these kind of operations. It's impossible to get there from Israel otherwise. And they have, of course, proxy elements still, some in Iraq, and there are some actually around the world. If you recall all the different activities of the Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force, and some of their um, those they've recruited in other countries, there's a possibility of that as well.
Well, I'm kind of curious from your perspective, General Petraeus, this bunker buster bomb. There's been a lot of interest around this capability and what it would be able to do to Fordow, basically not allowing Iran to be able to enrich uranium at this deep, deep underground facility, which has been really protected because of where it sits. Tell us a little bit about how you think this might work if the U.S. were to jump in and say we're going to utilize this bomb, and we're going to bring in the B-2 bombers needed, or the B-2 bomber needed. Uh, what do you see happening?
Well, first of all, the This is much more than a bunker buster. This is a mountain buster. It's a huge piece of ordnance. Again, as I mentioned, 30,000 pounds, thousands of pounds of explosive in that. It's designed to penetrate hard material and keep on going and then actually explode. It's fair to ask whether it could get all the way through with the first mop that's dropped or if multiple ones would be required. The U.S. forces will be prepared for that contingency. We should recall that Fordow was actually disclosed. I think it was in September of 2009. I was the Central Command commander at the time. It was disclosed by the IAEA with, I think, some information provided from various intelligence organizations and validated by the IAEA. As the commander of U.S. Central Command, I was directed to develop a plan to destroy the Iran nuclear program, and obviously that was a critical target within the target set that existed for this, in addition to other capabilities and assets that would need to be taken down to ensure success of the overall mission. And it's publicly known that we conducted a rehearsal of this some months later, and this was to be used if, in fact, the negotiations that had just begun proved to be unsuccessful. We did that rehearsal within the United States, the lower 48, but of course, some of those aircraft flew many laps of the lower 48 to get in the distance that they would have to fly if they came out of U.S. bases and had to go all the way out to the Middle East. Dropped the munitions that we envisioned employing. They worked. We proved that we could do the mission that was required. Some required multiple munitions through the same hole in different sites. And so I'm confident that we can crack the mountain and can get down into the mission space and destroy what is down there. Now, again, there are possible other means of doing that. We'll see if they actually materialize in the days before we employ our air assets to do that. Occasionally people ask me, why don't we just give it to Israel? The answer is, of course, they don't have an aircraft that can carry it. The second is, why don't we just give them a B-2 and let them use it themselves? And the answer to that is that it's quite a bit of training to transition from even an F-35 to a B-2 and then to employ a precision munition like this. Great, very combat experienced pilots in the Israeli Air Force without question, but that still would take quite a bit of time to do this and to make sure that you don't rush to failure in that time. So again, I'm confident the plan that we developed back then, one time we actually set the theater. We thought we might actually have to execute it. In other words, we had all of the food, fuel, munitions, bed down, everything else in place, all the different bases. All we needed to do was fly in the aircraft. It didn't come to that. And of course, ultimately, this proved unnecessary because, of course, there was an agreement during the latter stages of the Obama administration and the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran Nuclear Accord, which then, of course, the Trump 1.0 withdrew from at that time. And since then, of course, Iran has begun enriching well above what it was that they had before the JCPOA.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you one final question before I let you go here, and that is on the issue of drones. Iran has been producing drones at mass levels. Iran has been supplying drones to Russia for use in Ukraine. How are you thinking about the opportunities here to degrade their ability, if you will, to produce drones at the levels they are? It seems like this is just a matter of taking out some type of warehouse and they build another. Is it sort of a game of whack-a-mole when it comes to drones?
Well, Israel is painstakingly reducing all the infrastructure that can be used, first and foremost, for the nuclear program, second, for strikes against them, and that certainly includes drones and a variety of different missiles of different range. And then going beyond that to essentially the regime infrastructure, individual leaders, not just of the military, but also the Revolutionary Guards Corps, the Quds Force, other elements, as I mentioned before, the Ministry of Interior headquarters, and so forth. So again, this will just depend on intelligence. It's not that easy to set up a production line, and if Israel finds it, I think they will take it out again. I doubt that Iran is going to be exporting Shahed drones to Russia anytime soon. Although sadly, my understanding is that there is a plant already in Russia that actually is producing Shahed drones, and we're certainly seeing greater use of drones against Ukraine in recent weeks and months. But in the other direction, Russia is also not in a position to provide the S-300 or S-400 advanced air and ballistic missile defense system, which they had provided, in which Israel damaged very considerably in responding to the second of the attacks from Iranian soil to Israel. Also, before I end, I also just want to mention, beyond what I did about the JCPOA, that created a very good situation, one that the chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces said made Israel more secure for 10 years. And that is the point to recall, that there were sunset clauses in that agreement. And within a few years, they were going to start to expire. And that's one of the two reasons why that agreement was not sufficient. The other was that the IAEA could not inspect everywhere that they wanted. There were some sites that were off limit, including some where we believed that there had been some work done on actually creating a nuclear device. So if there's a new agreement, I think it should achieve all that the previous one did and actually more, and especially given that I think the U.S. is in a position to deliver an ultimatum to the supreme leader, and not these negotiations back and forth that have begun in Europe. This is about you give up your entire nuclear program, all of it. There are no sunset clauses. If you need low enriched uranium for a civilian nuclear energy generation, we'll provide that to you. And also, the IAEA has every right to inspect anywhere they want, and also to oversee the dismantlement of whatever remaining stocks of enriched uranium there are, and also, of course, the destruction of the enrichment capabilities that Iran has. I think that's absolutely crucial. And I think that the U.S. is in a position, again, to say, take it or leave it. And if you leave it, you need to be prepared for what is likely going to happen. So far, the Supreme Leader has been very much in denial, shall we say, and pushing back very hard. He's not in the least apparently willing to negotiate or compromise. And again, I don't think there should be negotiation. I think it should be, this is it, take it or leave it again. But, there may be people within the regime who are starting to ask themselves, tell me how this ends, as I did during the fight to Baghdad, as it was clear that a lot of the assumptions who had been provided were being disproven. In this case, they will be asking, what, we had a pretty good thing going. We milk the economy, we control the economy in about 30 or 40%. We have enormous oil and gas reserves. And this behavior that we've engaged in has brought this all down ourselves. Could we contemplate rejecting the revolutionary state that we were, in other words, a country that is not satisfied with the status quo, and actually be a status quo state, get out from all of this, give up these foolish nuclear dreams that we have had, and live with our neighbors and enjoy the extraordinary blessings that we have, which are now being increasingly denied to us, not to mention our infrastructure, our commanders, even our people are suffering enormously. We no longer have capable proxies in the region, even as you noted, Hezbollah is dramatically degraded. Iraqi Shia militia still are there. They could still carry out some actions, but even they have to be hesitant given what's happening to the mothership in Iran. And Hamas is very degraded as well and can't help Iran in its hour of need, as I noted before. They haven't been destroyed yet. That's a subject for another day. But the situation is so dramatically changed, you wonder if there's not somebody within the regime who might be a bit pragmatic, could gather others around him, and end up being the guys with the most guns and the greatest organization, and allow the supreme leader to go into retirement earlier than he expected. That's a long shot, probably, In effect, it could result in fracturing of the regime, could result in fracturing of the country. The problem is that I don't see an opposition figure outside the regime, despite the fact that probably 80% of Iran hates the regime and all of the restrictions imposed. And now, above all, the damage and destruction that the regime has brought on a country that generally has a well-educated population and has incredible energy blessings. So we'll see how that plays out in the weeks and months that lie ahead. In the meantime, I think it'll be really interesting to watch what takes place here in Washington and whether or not the administration welcomes debate on this particular issue, which I think they should, or tries to stifle it. I think, again, that a healthy debate, a discussion, especially given our past experiences, and again, especially given that the legal basis for this can't be the authority to use military force. Arguably, self-defense is a bit of a weak argument and really should therefore have an authorization for Congress, given that there is time to actually pursue that. And I think Congress actually would support this in the end, and it would be done in a bipartisan fashion.
That means a lot coming from you. I know how close you still work with a lot of senior members of Congress and how engaged they are in these topics. Thank you so much, General David Petraeus, for taking a few minutes to provide what I think has been incredible perspective and context around what we're seeing. Thank you so much for your time.
Great to be with you, Suzanne, and thanks again for your leadership of the Cipher Brief.